Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Melissa Clarke again, and welcome to another episode of Excuse Me, Doctor. We are here each and every Monday night at 9 o'clock Eastern Time to help you, my Be Health Empowered family, be empowered when it comes to the information that you need to make wise decisions about your health, the health of your family, and the health of your community. It's so important now, more than ever before, to use facts and not speculation or disinformation or what you see on a Facebook post to make informed decisions about your health. So thank you so much for joining me tonight. For those who are here for the first time, welcome. Please remember, if you're joining on Facebook, to hit follow. And if you are joining on YouTube for the first time, welcome also. And please also hit subscribe there. Tonight's topic, well, I'm sure you all, if you haven't heard yet, you must be living in, outer Mongolia or somewhere. The president has COVID-19. And that's what we're going to be talking about. It's all we've been hearing about for the last few days. And it likely, as we know, started at that super spreader event on last Saturday at the White House, because it seems like half of DC now has COVID-19 because of that super spreader event. As a matter of fact, the public health officials in DC say that event alone has accounted for more cases, or as many cases, or close to as many cases as the largest super spreader events prior to this in DC. A lot of people have been affected by that one event. And we're talking about the event that happened in the Rose Garden with the after party inside the White House. So it's really important to understand all the dynamics of what's going on with that. I was on the Russ Parr morning show this morning talking about it. I'll be back on there tomorrow. And we're going to delve into that in this episode. We're going to talk all about the president's health, the fact that he went home today. I'll break down for you all the different terms and medications and treatments that you've heard. And I'll love to get your comments. I'll love to get your questions. We'll even entertain conspiracy theories. Don't come to me about RBG causing this from the grave, though, because that's way beyond anything that I could actually address. So you can leave that particular conspiracy theory off. But I would love to hear from you, and we're going to be getting into your questions and comments very, very shortly. But before we get to that, we are going to do our weekly recap, as we usually do. So let's start off with the numbers. And those numbers, unfortunately, are growing faster and faster. 40 to 50,000 new cases a day, adding to that 7.7 million cases that we already have now in the United States. And, Dr. Fauci warned us going into this that as we get closer and closer to the fall and winter, it was concerning that our baseline was at 40,000 cases, but now we're at 50,000 cases a day. And in addition, our death toll, unfortunately, now is 214,000 people who have died from COVID-19. And to that, we're adding 700 to 1,000 souls every day. The only silver lining in this is that over 4 million people have recovered. Actually, over 4.8 million people have recovered. And so that's wonderful news. But then within all of this, now here comes the President of the United States, who's now contracted COVID-19, along with at least 17 other people from this super spreader event at the White House. We know at least 3 senators, 3 journalists in the White House press corps, along with at least 11 others, and those are being added to, seems like just about every day we hear somebody new. So what do we know about this so far? Well, We talked about the super spreader event. We talked about the after party, the reception that was inside where people were hugging and talking. No, not a mask in sight inside that. And then we still don't know when the president may have gotten COVID, because no one, the White House staff, nor his medical team, has come out and told us when his last negative test is. He was supposed to be getting tested daily, so presumably it should have been on Wednesday, but we don't know. And then, we heard that he tested positive on Thursday. We heard that first it was the rapid test, which is a test that, especially the company that gives it, Abbott, their particular rapid test has been judged not always accurate, actually inaccurate about 20% of the time. So then he got the more reliable test, the PCR test, and that also came up positive. And that all happened on Thursday. So this means that at the debates, when he was debating with Vice President Biden, that he was infectious and there was no barrier or anything between them. It's also important to note that these tests are more accurate 5 to 8 days after you're exposed. So the fact that his test was positive on Thursday, we know that it's most accurate 5 days after. Well, that was about 5 days after that super spreader event. We also know that Vice President Biden tested negative yesterday. That was 5 days after the debate. So that's really good news. He's going to have to continue to get daily tests up until at least day 8 or 9 post the debate to be sure that he did not contract COVID-19 at that debate. Then the other thing that we know is that, he was diagnosed on Thursday, and it was in the beginning, it was spun like everything was rosy and everything was great. And, oh, we're just going to give him this experimental drug. Huh? What? You're giving him an experimental drug? Well, if everything is fine, why does he need it? Well, this particular drug, the monoclonal antibodies, are meant to be given to people early in the course of the disease, but it's unproven, untested. Only 275 people have actually taken this drug, and that we know whether it's safe or not in those 275 people. But it really needs to be tested much more broadly before you should actually give it to somebody as a treatment. So that's, concerning that the president of the United States got something that was totally experimental and unproven. And actually, the night of the debates was the night that they released the press release about the monoclonal antibody being tested on 275 people with some good preliminary results. So that's very concerning. Then Friday, he was airlifted to Walter Reed. Again, it was downplayed. Oh, it's just an abundance of caution. And then we have his doctor, Dr. Connolly, who seems to be very evasive. He's using excuses like HIPAA, which probably President Trump has told him, don't tell him anything bad. I'm not authorizing you to say anything bad, and you can just use HIPAA as an excuse. And then there's also the fact that he misrepresented whether the president's oxygen level dropped. And why is it so important to know about the oxygen level? Well, we're going to get into that, but the oxygen level can help to determine how severe you are. Basically, if your oxygen level drops, that takes you from a mild case to a moderate case, and how deeply it drops, how far it drops, takes you from moderate to severe. And each of those categories dictates what medications you should get. So we know he got remdesivir. We know he got steroids. We know that those are for moderate to severe cases of COVID-19. Actually, dexamethasone, the steroid, is specifically for severe cases of COVID-19. So we know that. We also know he had a fever. And we know that despite him saying that he understands COVID-19 now, that he got in the motorcade and exposed his Secret Service personnel to it with just a surgical mask on, and they did not have on full PPE like one should when in close quarters with somebody who's a known positive. And then he left the hospital today. And we know that his doctor said he's not out of the woods. So presumably they did not voluntarily discharge him knowing that he's not out of the woods. They just probably mitigated the risk by doing as much as possible to beef up what the surveillance and the monitoring that he'll get at the White House, along with being able to give the final dose of remdesivir tomorrow and dexamethasone. So that's kind of a summary of where we are today. There's still so many questions. I know you have them. Now, typically we would have our weekly update. I'm sorry, our weekly debunk, but we're going to skip over the weekly debunk and go straight to your questions. And to make this a really lively discussion tonight, I am really excited to have our producers of Excuse Me Doctor on camera. So coming from behind the scenes and joining me tonight will be Lila Mays, our West Coast producer. So happy that you're here, Lila.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here.
Wonderful. And our East Coast producer, Mr. Wayne Bruce.
Wow.
So wonderful to have you all on camera with me tonight. I know that you all have been getting the comments, theories from your Facebook page, and the questions.
Indeed.
And so, I know they're going to be good.
You see, I had the question. I was typing in my name, question mark.
Right.
Just to make sure. And I may go on camera. And so if I look, I'm going to tell everybody now, if I look to the left, I'm actually running the show while I'm on camera. So it's a little, hey, everybody.
He's talented like that. He's talented.
I got to do something for a living. I mean, my wife wouldn't let me do anything different.
Well, I know it's time to get right to it. And so, Lila, what you got for me?
Well, I just want to say first off that I'm so glad we're doing this show. And just for the people's edification, we were really talking about doing a different kind of show for this week. And then we got news that the president tested positive. So we knew we had to come before the people to discuss this. And for me as a producer and Wayne as co-producers, we're constantly gathering information and trying to stay on top of the things that are happening. But as human beings outside of this work, having conversations and getting our feelings sort of caught up in our opinions about it. So I've had several conversations sort of defending the fact that he actually has COVID. And so I had to move away from that and go, I can't convince people that he's sick, but what we can do is talk about the information that we've received, the diagnosis we've received, and the reports about the treatment. So Dr. Mel, here are some of the comments that I've actually seen. A couple of them I've addressed, but I'm gonna jump right into this one. My friend sent me this in a text. And I'm taking these from Facebook, Twitter, all over social media. My friend sent me this in a text. If he lives, he lied. COVID-19 is perfectly built to kill him. Overweight, old, horrible diet, etc. He has a 1% chance of survival. At the very least, he should require ICU hospitalization like others. Is that true? A 1% chance of survival? Even with his comorbidities?
Yeah, so that is absolutely not true. What is true in there is that COVID is built to take advantage of people with coexisting disease like obesity and people who are older, people specifically over 65, and we know that he's 74. However, even in the age group with the highest level of morbidity, and that's people 80 and over, the death rate is still 15%. Now that's 15% more than we'd want it to be, but that still means that 85% of people survive. I've said before on this show and also on the Russ Parr Morning Show that I have an aunt who's 90 who had COVID-19,
right,
and she survived. She never went to the hospital, thank God. And so that is absolutely not false. It's way more than a 1% survival rate.
Okay. I have someone. We have an excuse me, doctor.
No, excuse me, doctor. Now it's coming. It's coming.
Okay. Here's the next one. Doctor, this question came up quite a bit. What is hypoxic?
So hypoxic means that the oxygen in your blood is low. So just a little refresher. You know, the purpose of your lungs is to get oxygen into your blood. Your blood then takes the oxygen to your tissues and your cells so that they can get the benefit of it. And when they put that little pulse oximeter, that little clothespin looking thing on your finger, it's to measure your oxygen. And ideally, you want to be somewhere between 95 to 100% saturated. So just remember, 95 to 100 is where you want to live, at least. People who smoke or have lung disease, typically they live at a lower level than that. But if you're healthy, that's where you should be. And so for people who the cutoff for what's considered severe COVID is if your oxygen level drops below 94%. And that's typically when, around that level, 94, 95% is when they're going to start oxygen on you. And so supplemental oxygen to keep you from getting hypoxic. And we know that the president's level dropped as far as him needing supplemental oxygen and also him needing remdesivir and needing steroids, both of which are generally given to people who have oxygen issues.
Okay.
Excuse me, doctor. I have a question. This was actually, I asked some of my friends and family for questions for you tonight and before we got on. And this comes from our family in Ohio, Beryl, who is wonderful. She helps us out whenever she can, and if she's watching, thank you so much.
Thank you,
thank her again, Beryl. She said, "What are the side effects of the medications he's on?"
Wow, great question. So with the monoclonal antibodies, they're still being tested. They're experimental. So we don't exactly know. That's why they're still in research trials to figure that out. And then the remdesivir, headache, nausea, you know those long list of side effects they normally have on commercials. You have that sort of long list of non-specific side effects with remdesivir, but the most common ones are headache and nausea and stomach upset. And then with the dexamethasone, the steroid, the most common immediate effect is it raises your blood sugar levels, but also too, it can energize you. It can make you feel antsy. It can even give you, make you feel frantic, or some people say manic, where you have all this energy, but you really have no outlet for it. And so therefore it can affect your decision making. And I would bet, I'm sorry, I would bet that the decision to ride in the motorcade yesterday came after he got his first dose of steroids.
Is that a steroid decision?
It was a steroid decision. That's what I think. It's my personal opinion. I wasn't there and I am not on his medical team, but it seems to me, for all the world, like it was a steroid decision because he felt energetic. And even today, he tweeted before he went home that he felt like he was 20 years younger. That's the steroids.
Wow.
And he's going to have a rude awakening when those when the dose gets weaned and tapered and goes off, that he's not going to feel as like he did 20 years ago.
Okay. So Facebook family, YouTube family, do y'all hear that? Based on the information, okay? We're based on the information that we received. He has a diagnosis. He's been given steroids. The steroids are what are making him feel like he's 20 years younger. Not necessarily that he never had it. I just want to say that. I'm not trying to make you convinced that he has it, but based on the information, it could be the steroid. And Dr. Mel, I heard today on one of the outlets that it could absolutely have a manic effect. But one of the things I found really interesting was that this doctor said that if you are, it sort of plays to whatever your typical behaviors are. So if you are already sort of over the top, it's going to push that.
Wow.
That's what I heard today.
Steroids do that?
Yeah, steroids can do that. Yes, and for people who have asthma, who may have taken them before, or rheumatoid arthritis, you all know what that feeling is like of being on steroids. So, yeah, that's absolutely true. It keeps you up at night. We already know that he has problems sleeping, so I imagine he probably is not really getting a whole lot of sleep either, which also can affect your decision-making capacity. So, the other thing too is because of these effects and because he's entering this period of 5 to 10 days, which is when you're most vulnerable to, your condition getting worse. Now it's not a great time to go home. And I'm pretty sure, like I said in the opening, that when the doctor said he's not out of the woods, they did not sign off on him going home. He is their commander in chief because they are military doctors. I think Connolly is in the Navy and the others are in the other branches of the armed forces. So he probably commanded them, hey, send me home. And they just had to do the best they could.
So, excuse me, we have a excuse me, doctor moment without the question mark this time. And people get to see me. And first of all, I would just like to thank all my friends, for doing this. I mean, you guys have been so supportive of this program and this platform. And I mean, some of my friends I see, they go back to junior high school with me. So thank you for loving the program. Thank you for loving Dr. Mel. Thank you for loving my wife, Dr. Melissa Clarke. Thank you for loving a great friend of ours, Lila Mays, who's a co-producer of the show. But we have a question, and this question comes from Alexis Proctor-Kellum. Besides the POTUS, who else would qualify to receive the Regeneron cocktail?
No one at this point in time, because it's still experimental. And hi, Alexis. So if you meet the criteria to enroll in the clinical trial, which means that you have mild COVID disease and you've never, and you have no other contraindications to receiving it, like allergic reactions, etc., then you could enroll officially in the clinical trial, at which point, all the risks would be explained to you and you would sign up and volunteer to do that. But if you're not in the trial, no one else qualifies. And he had this special exemption granted to him because he's the president of the United States. And, there are arguments on both sides, but more for not giving it to him because you're taking a big risk with the president of the United States, who is our public servant, essentially, and important for our national security. And, I think it's questionable as to whether you should be experimenting on him.
So, Dr. Mel, I have another question. Based on all of the based on all of the meds, the steroids and the experimental drugs, what might they have seen in the imaging to prescribe the medications that he's taking?
That's a great question. So in the imaging, they're looking at his lungs. Typically it's a chest x-ray, and they may also order a CAT scan of the lungs to look for blood clots in the lungs as well. And also sometimes chest x-rays are not as sensitive. They don't pick up on some of the subtleties that a CAT scan would. So I imagine that he probably got both of those. And more than likely, they saw a pneumonia. Now, we heard them being questioned this evening about what the imaging showed, and I think that was when they said they couldn't release that because of HIPAA. But I guarantee you, if the imaging showed absolutely nothing and beautiful, pristine lungs, they probably would have said, "Oh, his lungs look great. They look like the lungs of a 20-year-old," right? So and then based upon the criteria for giving remdesivir and dexamethasone, that would also suggest that he has some lung involvement. And also, of course, the fact that the oxygen dropped, because typically the oxygen would only drop if your lungs were compromised and could not do their job effectively, and hence get oxygen into your bloodstream.
And what is the criteria for that, Dr. Mel? What's the criteria to receive that medication?
Well, for the remdesivir, the emergency use authorization, and realize it's not been fully approved, it's an emergency use authorization granted by the FDA. It's for people who have moderate COVID-19, so typically lung involvement, with or without compromise in their oxygen. However, because the supply of it is limited, doctors typically only reserve it for people who have a drop in their oxygen, but not such a big drop that you have to be on a ventilator, because it hasn't been proven in those people when you get that far out that it helps. And then for the steroids, and this is really key, for the steroids, it typically is only in people whose immune system is overreacting to COVID-19 and causing that overinflammation, and where you see the organ damage like heart attacks and strokes and blood clots. And that's who it helps the most. If you give it to people whose immune system is behaving as it should and not overreacting, you actually can cause harm, and those people do worse. So that tells me that he has severe COVID, because otherwise his doctors would not have prescribed the steroid.
And is there any possibility, like, just sort of exploring everything here, in terms of him being the commander-in-chief and this being a military space where, they have to listen to what he says? And I'm asking this question because, he was released from the hospital today, probably against their better wishes and their recommendations. Would he have, and you may not be able to answer this, but would he have been able to demand these experimental medications as the president of the U.S.?
So let me interrupt you, Lila, because we have a question that's come in. We had quite a few questions along this line, but this one comes in especially from someone who served in the press corps at the White House. And this comes from Sonia Ross. Maybe you mentioned it already. Could the president have requested an experimental cocktail for compassionate reasons, even if he weren't sick enough? And Sonia Ross worked for a number of years with Associated Press, but she was part of the White House press corps. Right. So we thank her for that.
Great question, Sonia. Actually, she was with the president on 9/11. So that's a great question, along with Lila's question. I don't know that as the president of the United States that he would have jurisdiction over the drug company and over the trial. However, you certainly can request, his doctors could have requested on his behalf for the compassionate use exemption. And that typically is how medications are given outside of a trial, but it's very, very rare. And for this medication in particular, because it is designed for people with mild COVID-19, typically compassionate use is reserved for when there's a life-threatening situation going on. So by definition, if it's just from people with mild COVID-19, it would be really unusual to get a compassionate use exemption because the person is not on death's door. So I don't know how it came about that he actually got it. We can only speculate. But I don't think that it was sort of a direct command because he wouldn't necessarily have that sort of jurisdiction over the drug company.
Okay. And here's excuse me, doctor. This is not from me. This is from our audience tonight. And wow, we have them pouring in. This one comes from Valerie Spalding Parker, who is she's just always watching, and we thank her for watching. In your medical opinion, and based on the evasiveness of the president's doctors, do you think he is more seriously ill than he is letting on? How about that one?
Yeah, so we kind of touched on that. Hi, Valerie. I think at this point, I think he's doing well, considering how sick he was. So I think Thursday, Friday, Saturday, he was very sick, and that was why they were so evasive. Now, if you can trust the vital signs that they gave this morning, which was only one point in time, they say that he's been without a fever, for 72 hours and that he's off fever reducing medicines, which actually isn't technically true because he's on aspirin and he's on the steroids, which can also bring down a fever. They said his blood pressure, his heart rate, his breathing rate, and his oxygen in his blood were all normal, not on oxygen. So at least for this point in time, he's doing better than expected, but that's because he's had top-notch treatment. He's had these drugs given to him relatively early on. He's being watched like a hawk. He's been hydrated. So he probably feels good, but he, as they said, is not out of the woods because he was so severe and because these drugs still they haven't even finished the course. He's only had 4 out of the 5 days of remdesivir. And he has steroids typically are given for 10 days. So he's only on a day about 2 or 3. We don't know exactly when they were started. So he still has a long way to go. I don't know. You guys may have had the experience of taking an antibiotic, for example, for a couple days and you feel good. And you stop taking it and then you have a relapse. So hopefully that won't happen in this case.
I have a question from the West Coast. From Beverly Jackson. So this goes back to him having access to this experimental drug. There are rumors that he is friends with the co-founder of the drug company. If so, would that have allowed him to bypass the exemption?
So, I researched that and I couldn't find any reference to it. They said that they play golf together. I read that as a possibility. So certainly, if you're conducting a trial and you're the owner of a drug company and the president of the United States or one of his emissaries calls you and says, hey, we need that drug, the president is sick, you're probably, whether you know him or not, just because he is the president, you're probably going to say, yes, we will break protocol and provide it to you because you're the president or you're the president's doctor and you've asked for it. It could be just as simple as that. It might not necessarily be that they're golfing buddies or any kind of friends.
Okay, excuse me, doctor. I have a lot of questions of my own, and I haven't been able to ask you because you have been working feverishly on another project. But I'm going to take everybody's questions from Facebook and YouTube right now, and we have some great questions coming in. And I noticed this question from Angela Duncan Jope. She says, I noticed when they talked about what he was taking prior to his being admitted, he was taking supplements such as zinc, vitamin C, and melatonin. What are your thoughts about those? Also, notice no hydroxychloroquine. Thoughts?
Great question, Angela. So yes, he's on zinc and vitamin C. Both of which, and vitamin D is in dog, all of which we'll only first deal with vitamin D. Vitamin D has been extensively researched, and it's been shown that people who have low vitamin D levels, when they're diagnosed with COVID, tend to do worse. And so vitamin D has been added to a lot of people's regimens. And if you have a low vitamin D level, you should certainly be on vitamin D supplementation and be, eating fish, fatty fish like salmon, and getting as much sunlight as you can. Vitamin C and zinc are also thought to help to boost the immune system, which is probably another reason why he's on them. And zinc has antiviral properties. So those are some of the reasons why he's on that. Melatonin also too is being researched as something to help regulate the immune system and help as an to help boost the immune system against COVID-19, and it's being researched now. We typically know it as helping to get sleep, which we know that he needs because he's has a reputation for staying up for a lot of the night. So that also might be a reason why he's on the melatonin. For the hydroxychloroquine, yeah, I noticed that. And the same Dr. Connolly is the one who put him on it. And so there's been some questions about, sort of Dr. Connolly's medical judgment for that reason. And also, too, because when Trump had dinner with the president of Brazil, who subsequently tested positive for COVID, Dr. Connolly said, oh, well, he's probably okay because it was a low-risk exposure because the president wasn't symptomatic yet. Well, we know that it's right before you get your symptoms that you're the most infectious. So again, there have been some questions about Dr. Connolly's judgment for both of those calls.
Excuse me, doctor. We have Vanessa Williams. Gasping is currently trending on Twitter. Soon as he ascended the Truman balcony, he removed his mask. Many who suffered pneumonia or asthma are being triggered by the image of his breathing. Is it possible to identify pneumonia from a person's appearance?
Great question, Vanessa. You know, we as doctors are trained to observe a patient and observe the pattern of their breathing, how deep they're breathing, how fast they're breathing. And certainly that can clue you in to the fact that there's some problems with oxygen exchange getting to the blood. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you have pneumonia. There are other things that can cause low oxygen in the blood, but certainly that's why we do other investigations like the chest x-ray that I mentioned or the CAT scan. And given the context of him having COVID-19, if people observed that he was having a hard time breathing, that's certainly, pneumonia would be certainly an explanation for it. But of course, we know that hasn't been confirmed yet. So we have to wait until his medical team shares that, if they actually ever do.
I mean, I obviously don't have a medical degree, but and I've never had pneumonia, and I don't have asthma. But I was triggered watching him gasp for breath.
So
I hope you're feeling better now.
So let me say this: I have asthma, and I've had pneumonia, and he doesn't look great. And so we had another question. So we have a question coming from Nicole Steele. And this is a very important question. I want to get her question on. Let me get it on. What's your take on large gatherings at this point? I say no, but since the world has opened back up, and I guess that's the emoji for.
I think it's like.
So what's your take?
Yeah. So, you know, you kind of have to look at what region of the country you live in. And as you know, there are different phases. For example, in this area, many places have gone to phase 3, and phase 3 typically means that places operate at either 25% or 50% of capacity. And it all has to do with how much community spread is happening in your neck of the woods. So for large gatherings in general, at this point in most places with cases going back up, probably not a good idea at all. And definitely never large gatherings indoors, because that's where the super spreader events are coming from. We've certainly seen large gatherings with the protests outdoors with people wearing masks, and there's been very few bumps in case counts as a result of those. But the safest thing at this point, still, if you live in an area where the case count is going up, which is actually in 45 out of the 50 states right now, large gatherings, a no-no.
So we have another question coming from Angelique Proctor. And Angelique Proctor she was actually on the show.
Yes.
On our show. And she is a anchor, reporter in Atlanta at Fox 5 Atlanta. So we want to shout out Angelique and thank her for watching tonight. She asked, one of the first things that Trump did was take off his mask when he arrived at the White House. He then went inside without it. Doesn't this put those inside the COVID hotbed White House at risk, since he has the virus? She emphasized has. Is he still contagious? He is still contagious, correct? That's what the actual question said. So,
great question, Angelique. Hi, Angelique. So what's really disturbing about this is, you know, yesterday on his video message, he said that he gets it. He understands COVID now. And I think it's mainly that he understands that COVID is not a hoax, but he still apparently does not seem to get that he has COVID and therefore is contagious, and that people around him, when he goes around them without a mask, and even with a surgical mask, if he's close enough, he's putting them at risk. So not only did he take off his mask when he went into the White House last night, he was in that car with the Secret Service agents with only a surgical mask on, which typically in most circumstances is okay. But if you're in a sealed car, a hermetically sealed car, it's not a good idea to only have on a surgical mask and the Secret Service agents not have on full PPE. And then back at the White House, taking off the mask, yes, he most definitely is putting the White House staff and those around him at risk by taking the mask off. Presumably, he is still contagious. You are thought to be contagious 10 days, up until 10 days after your first symptoms. So if we go with what he says, his first symptoms were Wednesday night, Thursday. So 10 days from then is sometime next week.
I have a question. I have a comment and a question. So the comment that I took from social media says, I know people who've had it. It takes almost a week to get the results back. So how could he possibly have it when he got his results in a day? Go ahead, Doc.
Yeah, so good question. This is where the divide comes in America, and this is where privilege comes in. And as a president, he has the privilege and the people around him of getting the rapid test, which, again, as I mentioned before, it comes back in 15 minutes time, but it tends to be wrong about 20% of the time. So it's great because it's convenient. It comes back quickly.
But wrong how, Doc? Wrong false negative or false
negative. So if it comes back positive, you could pretty much bank on it. But if it comes back negative, it really should be backed up by a more reliable test, which is the PCR test, the one that your friend mentions takes a week in some places. Some places I've even seen it take 17 days, but ideally it's supposed to only take 2 to 3 days to come back. So, but the White House, because they have access to their own machine and own people who are dedicated to doing tests, it can come back a lot quicker than that. Hence, he was tested and it came back in the same day. So that's why it's the resources that he has available to him that allows him to get these test results much quicker than you or I or most of the American population.
Right.
Which still there is under testing going on. We don't have enough resources for testing and labs, etc., for our population.
So let's follow that line because this is kind of how the show came about. This show, and not saying excuse me, doctor, but this show, excuse me, doctor, the producers edition. So the producers, myself and Lila, are just, and we talk a lot, are just like everybody else. Everybody has an opinion on it. And the testing is one of the things that all three of us agree, and we've learned from Dr. Mel, as I call her, as we learn from Dr. Mel, we are under tested in this country, right?
Yes.
So Lila and I went back and forth on this whole, does he have it? Is it a hoax? Because literally it's been tough and we just did an episode on the media's coverage of this. And can we trust our current government with medical information, and can we trust what's coming out their mouths? And so we went back and forth on whether we could trust this was a real story, and we literally were, by the end of it, I'll talk to you later, you really at each other's throat. And you know, as it played out, I was wrong. It seems to be he has it. And, you know, it's really tough getting information out. So what do you think just about, if you're a doctor, if you're true to your oath, and into to what you're, like as a musician and a producer, I'm true to this. So I produce, I create. That's what I'm true to. As a doctor, you are true to being a physician and healing. How do you deal with a patient kind of like who doesn't want you to give proper information out? How are they dealing with that as doctors? How do you?
Yeah, so if I understand you correctly, you're saying, how does a doctor deal with a patient who has demands about how their care should go and what information should be given out? So, you as the patient, or a patient, really should be the one who dictates what happens to their medical information. So when he stands up there and he says, the president doesn't want me to talk about this, that is actually reasonable, right?
Mm-hmm.
In a certain way, it's ethical in terms of giving the patient the decision over what information is shared. But the issue comes in when you outright lie, okay?
Mm-hmm.
At which it appears that he meaning the doctor who was given the press conference, misrepresented the facts. So when he said initially that, he wasn't on oxygen today. Well, it turns out that he was on oxygen that day. That's a lie. And then there's also the issue of how much should the American people know about what's going on with his health condition? Is it important for us to know that he has pneumonia? At least people who make the decision about whether he should cede power to or decision making to the vice president need to know the details of his case. So hopefully, at least in his inner circle, people know what the side effects of the medicines are, how sick he really is his oxygen compromised? Because if you're not getting enough oxygen to your brain, guess what? You're not making good decisions. So there are all kinds of reasons why the question of, is he fit to be making decisions right now are coming up. But as far as the doctor's responsibility, it comes to the patient first, but it does not include lying.
Okay. So we have a few excuse me doctors, and we have a Tracy Clarke who has been posting and some of the funniest things, but the funniest thing that Tracy Clarke, and I'm going to pull it up, said, what are the, not everyone is, I'll get to it. Oh, here it is. Tracy Clarke. What about the effectiveness of hydroxychloroquine he's supposedly been taking? That's funny.
Yeah. So, hi, Tracy. Apparently he's not on it because it was not listed on the list of medications that he was on prior to this happening.
So, Doc, can I interrupt you?
Yeah. Why?
I just want to interrupt you because I get to do this because we're in this forum right now, and we're actually 48 minutes in. So, look, speaking to the hydroxychloroquine, where were those doctors? Those didn't look like the same doctors.
You stole my question.
Those didn't look like the same doctors.
You stole my question.
Doctors. Where's the lady with the strip mall doctor? Where's the strip mall doctor?
Yeah, America's Frontline Doctors. Yeah, no, they were nowhere to be found. Absolutely nowhere to be found.
Weren't they ophthalmologists?
A set of doctors who actually really take care of patients with COVID-19 and other serious diseases in a hospital setting. We don't know about the ophthalmologist or the strip mall doctor or any of those other people. They were nowhere to be found. And as far as hydroxychloroquine, most, actually all, specialty societies that deal with this issue, even the FDA that had granted it emergency use authorization, everybody's basically come out and said the studies do not support that it helps in COVID-19, and it actually may do harm. And I think as we knew that hydroxychloroquine has heart side effects. And you may say, well, people with lupus take it. Yes, that's true. However, with COVID-19, you have an acute inflammation of the heart in many patients. And so that probably is one reason why it is causing harm once you take its side effects combined with the heart inflammation effects of COVID-19. The two don't go together well. It's not a great idea to take it at all for COVID-19.
Lila?
You took my question.
I did. So listen, go ahead.
I want to, if you can, Dr. Mel, give us and we've been talking about steroids and how they work and all of that, but if you could give us just a quick summary of how steroids manage inflammation, and again, why that's so important in COVID-19 treatment.
Sure. So think of COVID as having two phases. First is the phase where your normal immune system is kicking in. That's the fever, that's the body aches. And typically, you get this with the flu, you might get this with other infections, and that's a normal immune response. It's your immune cells and your antibodies revving up to do their thing, right? Mm-hmm. And then there's this second phase of COVID-19, and that's what makes it deadly. And that's when your immune system kind of goes into hyperdrive, and it's just attacking everything, not just the virus, but also your internal organs, the lining of your blood vessels. And so that's what leads to kidney problems and heart problems and blood clots. So the steroids come in and they say, okay, we're going to tamp down on your immune system. We're going to basically tell it to chill out. And so for people who are in that overdrive, overreactive stage, it's great because it allows the body inflammatory response to basically be controlled, and therefore those side effects that lead to death and ICU admission, they are more effectively dealt with. But if you give it to the people who have a normal immune response, they can get worse. And so that's why I said earlier on, the fact that they gave him steroids tells me that he had moved into that over-inflammatory stage that can be so deadly. So that's really important to keep in mind.
Okay, Dr. Clarke, was that a phone? Because I think we saw the phone thing about 6 months ago.
18 weeks ago.
18 to 20 weeks ago.
It's ever gone off.
It is.
First time it's ever gone off.
It was a doctor calling me.
Okay. We must tell that doctor you have a show. And your producer said cut it off. But excuse me, doctor, we have a question from Sean L. Perry. And let me get his question on. Sean L. Perry says, from the SCOTUS ceremony, Attorney General Barr is surrounded and in close proximity with many who are now infected. Is it possible that his initial negative test is false? If so, how long until he's in the clear, at least from this event spreader?
Yeah, great questions, Sean. And Sean has a wonderful show, which I've been on, a radio show where he deals with issues for the senior population. So good to see you. So yeah, that super spreader event, and how long does he need to continue to get tested regarding the fact that he was so close, whispering to Kellyanne Conway and shaking her hand and all that. So I think I mentioned before, same with Joe Biden being exposed to the president on Tuesday, that up until 5 to 8 days out from the initial exposure, that's that period of time where tests are the most sensitive. So if you have the disease, they're going to be more likely to pick it up. So I would say that he has to go at least 8 days with a negative test to safely say that he did not get it, COVID-19, at that super spreader event. Obviously, the more tests you take that are negative, the more you can pretty much rely that yes, you don't have it. But to be 100% sure, go all the way to day 8. to make sure.
Excuse me, doctor. We have a question coming from Mateo Levine Ledesma. Dr. Mel, does a person's race or ethnicity change the treatment regimes or protocols?
Hi, Dr. Levine Ledesma. Good to see you. And I know you know the answer to this question, but thank you for asking it. No, actually, it should not and doesn't, in terms of the evidence, change the treatment for COVID-19. We do know that people who are indigenous people, indigenous Americans, Latino Americans, and African Americans are dying at a rate 2 to 3 times that of Caucasians, but the treatment is the same. Um, and that treatment, just to remind people, can be anything from remdesivir and steroids, but it typically also includes a blood thinner to help prevent blood clots for those people who get admitted to the hospital, who are severe enough to be admitted to the hospital.
So we're in the rapid fire section right now because we're coming down to the wire. And we have 2 great questions, I think. One comes from Melanie Brady. How many days are the antibodies active in your body? Once you have it in quarantine, is it true that you are still contagious? If so, how long?
Okay, so that's a good question. I don't know. I actually don't know the answer to. I'm assuming he means the antibodies that are given as part of the experimental protocol, the monoclonal antibodies. I don't know. I'll have to look that up and get back to you. And then what was the second part of the question?
How, once you have it in quarantine, is it true that you're still contagious? If so, how long are you contagious?
Yeah, so typically you remain contagious 10 days from the beginning of your symptoms, or if you never develop symptoms, 14 days from when you're exposed. So typically that's how long a quarantine should last.
Okay.
And you are still contagious during that period of time.
Okay. And the last question, I saw it here, comes from Angelique Proctor again. Once again, the reporter on the scene is trying to get the questions out. She said,
questions.
She has too many questions. Should Vice President Pence be in self-quarantine since he has been in such close proximity to so many COVID positive people? Should he be participating in Wednesday night's debate with Senator Kamala Harris?
Great question, Angelique. Yes, he was at the super spreader event, to my knowledge. He's tested negative, but again, just like Barr, he's not out of the woods. Neither of them are proceeding with quarantine when they should. And as far as the debate, I don't see why the debate cannot happen virtually. I think that would be the safest thing. We have 2 people who may one day be the president of the United States for whatever reason. We don't want them to get COVID. We definitely don't want, if Pence, Vice President Pence is already positive, we don't want him giving COVID-19 to potential Vice President Harris. Because, and that's one thing that has not come up, what about those long haulers? We don't know if the president of the United States is going to become a long hauler. We know that their nervous system affects where it can affect your judgment, your hearing, your vision. It can cause brain fog. So for several weeks to months after you've had COVID-19. So again, the best course of action is to never get infected. Now that the president has it, he needs to be extra vigilant to make sure that, that he doesn't become a long hauler. And we definitely don't want anyone else to be exposed to it who doesn't have to be. So I think that the debate should be virtual.
I agree.
I agree too.
Yeah. Is there a pill somebody can take for, is there a pill for common sense?
No, just keeping, they say main sana and corpore sano, sound mind and a sound body. just try to keep up your health as we talk about every week. The 5 self-health actions: getting enough sleep, getting enough rest, getting enough exercise, water, eating a nutritious diet, and managing the stress in your life every day. That's the best you could do.
Can you say those again, Dr. Clarke?
Absolutely. So I think of nutrition and water together: eating healthfully, getting enough water, and then movement and sleep, getting enough sleep, 7 to 8 hours a night, movement at least 30 minutes a day, and you can break that up into 10-minute bursts. And then lastly, managing the stress in your life, doing something each and every day, because we're stressed each and every day by stressors in our life. So whatever we do, whether it's Tai Chi, moving, gardening, playing the guitar, whatever it is, do it whatever, daily, so that it helps keep your stress level down.
Where can they find that information?
They can find that information in my book, Excuse Me, Doctor, I've Got What? It's available on Amazon and Kindle, or you can also get it from my website. And that's the only way to get an autographed copy.
Fantastic. I think that's
Great.
our show.
All right. Well, thank you to my wonderful producers. Now you see why I have so much fun working with them. Lila, Wayne, thank you so much. This was really fun and great questions. I didn't hear any good conspiracy theories, but maybe we'll get to that next week. So thanks so much for being on with me. Thank you to the audience. You guys have fantastic questions. Thank you for listening every week. And I will be on the Russ Parr Morning Show again tomorrow morning at 7:45 East Coast time for those of you early birds who are up listening to the radio. I'll be back here next Monday, 9 o'clock East Coast time. Until I see you again, be wise, be well, and be health empowered. Thanks for joining.
See everybody. Take care. Signing off.